Good morning. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the games industry. It's the largest entertainment industry in the world. It's at the intersection of art and technology, but I feel that not enough people know about the industry itself or the opportunities that exist within it. I started in the games industry not long after chess was invented in 640 BC. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my career in games, from starting Games Workshop in the 70s, then writing interactive game books in the 80s, launching video games like Tomb Raider in the 90s, and became an angel investor in the early 20s with mobile games in particular, also chairman of Sumo Group PLC that's going through a sale process to Tencent right now, and how I moved from an entrepreneur to investor by way of being a partner in Hero Capital. So my first endeavor was Games Workshop. I started with two old school friends. Here's one of them, Steve Jackson on the near side, and the really handsome guy on the other side, that's me. We wanted to turn our passion of playing games into an industry somehow. And so we put out a small newsletter called Owl and Weasel, and one of the copies of that found its way to a gentleman in the USA called Gary Gygax, who's just invented this game, Dungeons and Dragons, that you can see me holding the box there. We ordered 6 copies because that's all the money we had in the world, and on the basis of that huge order, we got an exclusive 3-year distribution agreement for the whole of Europe, because Gary Gygax was also operating out of a flat in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Emboldened by our newfound enterprise, Games Workshop, operating out of a top-floor flat in Shepherd's Bush, we proceeded to go to the bank manager, a little bit like this guy, and said, we got this great game, it's a role-playing game where you kill monsters and find treasure and go these fantastic journeys of the mind. And he looked at us rather like a dog watches television, had no understanding whatsoever what we were talking about, and urged us to leave quite quickly, which obliged us to live in a van, again similar to this one, called Van Morrison, which we parked outside a squash club in Shepherd's Bush for a period of 3 months. In his defense, I don't think we were actually investor ready. And I think one thing that I've learned over time is that if you want to get people to invest in you, you have to actually convince them more than being enthusiastic about the products of which you're enthusing about. So by not getting investment, we had to operate out of cash flow. And it took another 3 years before we opened our first Games Workshop store in 1978 in Hammersmith. We were delighted to see a very enthusiastic crowd waiting for us. And of course, Games Workshop grew. And of course, one of the other most important things I learned is establishing your own intellectual property. Workshop, of course, has grown on the back of Warhammer. When we lost the rights to Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax wanted to merge with Games Workshop. We said no to that opportunity. We were young, independent Brits. And so we forged our own destiny. And of course, if you want to add value to your company and determine your own destiny, you have to own your own intellectual property. And of course, Warhammer has been that for Workshop. Sold out of Workshop in 1991. Some might say slightly early because it's now worth £4 billion at the London Stock Exchange, but don't look back. We at the same time, we had an opportunity to start a new way of monetizing gaming content in terms of interactive game books in the 80s. These are books in which you are the hero, effectively analog hypertext, where you make choices at the end of each page, and then also fight monsters using dice. They were hugely successful. They sold 20 million copies, but because it had the word game in them, the establishment was really against them. The Evangelical Alliance published an 8-page warning guide saying because you're interacting with ghouls and demons, you're bound to get possessed by the devil. There were petitions sent in to Penguin Books saying parents wanted them banned because they thought that children were using their imaginations too much. And of course, when it comes to video games, the media tended to go into a kind of apoplectic frenzy whilst discussing the merits of various games. Therefore, a game like Grand Theft Auto 5, launched in 2013 by Rockstar North in Scotland, which generated $1 billion of sales in 3 days, was largely castigated and criticized for its content rather than celebrated for the great British success story in which it is. And I would argue, if you can park your prejudice against 1 or 2 titles that are 18 rated, and by the way, that only 5% of content is, and think cognitively what's happening when you're playing a game. Games are social. Games are great for rehabilitation. Games require you to problem solve. You can't get through a game without problem solving. Games give you continuous assessment. You're not judged in a moment whether you're able or less able, like you are in an examination. Over time, everyone can become a winner as they're encouraged to play again. Games are effectively a management simulation. In Roller Coaster Tycoon, you are understanding the physics of building the rides, the monetization of pricing the rides, and the staffing levels required to make that success. And if you don't succeed at first, you tweak the parameters until ultimately everyone has a successful theme park. And creativity in games knows no bounds. A game like Minecraft, where in the context, effectively digital Lego constructing the 3D architectural world, sharing them with their friends. A child in this context can apply the heat of a furnace to silica sand and make glass and put into their environment. And they won't forget that because they're learning by doing. This adds context. It's the application of knowledge that gives children so much excitement. And actually, we all know that children love learning, often hate school because they're not allowed to apply their knowledge in any meaningful way. So here's an industry that's worth $200 billion a year. 3 billion people are now playing games. You can see the pervasive nature of games through as advanced in technology like smartphones have made people who didn't think they were gamers now playing games everywhere. Advanced technology allows an additive growth to the market. VR, AR, and of course, become a spectator sport. With esports now, whilst the older generation prefers to watch physical sports in the real world, today's generation likes to watch their digital heroes, best in class playing digital sports and esports online, being streamed to millions of people around the world and monetizing that content. So the games world is actually building the metaverse using gaming technology, where people don't just play together, they come together in a world where digital meets the physical. So I'd argue that games, esports, d-sports, and their technologies are a core ecosystem for entertainment and also the economic and social life in the new economy. So I got into video games by first designing this game, Eureka, in the 80s, and joined that company which created IDOS PLC in 1995. And we launched Tomb Raider. In those days, the risk profile was much higher than it is today. These are premium products, physical products, having to be distributed through the supply chain, navigating the gatekeepers of that supply chain, getting into retail, and finally getting into the consumer. And if the game wasn't as you wanted it to be, or rated as well as it might have been, you got that physical stock back in inventory returns. So you had to navigate the whole world from a physical point of view. Today, the risk profile is completely changed. It's games as a service, free at the point of delivery, accessing a global market on whatever digital platform you choose, whether it's a smartphone, digital consoles, PCs. And guess what? The UK are very, very good at making games. We are incredibly good at making games. And a lot of these studios, the 2,000 micro studios, people trying to get off the ground, doing it in their spare time. But the point is, there's not been enough access to finance for the games industry. And we're so good at, as a creative nation, look at our film, our fashion, our music, our architecture, our publishing, and of course, video games. And I think video games has been one part of the creative industry that's never had the credibility that other parts of creative industries have. And in games as well, about the creativity part of it. Creativity shouldn't be seen just as the creative industry as a vertical. It should be seen as a horizontal, because design and intellectual property creation is fundamental to all businesses. So the games industry, our two most requirements are access to talent and access to funding. Where are we going to get the next software engineers, artists, animators, designers, and data scientists as games as a service being run like any other software as a service now? Over time, games that were released 4 or 5 years ago are still monetizing hugely successfully. And how do these games makers actually access finance that's relevant to them? Some of the angel investments I've made on this side, they're all small studios you probably haven't heard of apart from Sumo Group. And some of the exits I've had have been incredibly successful. Again, nobody knows about them. Playdemic, a studio in Wilmslow, It was sold a few years ago, 4 years ago, to Warner Brothers. It was all in the back of one game called Golf Clash, generating $150 million a year in revenue, probably $100 million EBITDA because there's only 50 people there. Sold quite recently to Electronic Arts for $1.3 billion. This is 60 people in Wilmslow. I don't know many other industries that can generate that kind of revenue per employee. Mediatonic, similarly, studio in London, created the game Fall Guys, again sold to Epic quite recently for $700 million or thereabouts. So we have to try and get all our creative industries, and games industry in particular, further up the value chain of ownership to realize full value rather than having to exit through project finance or trading away IP for project finance or just selling too soon. Most of the large brands that you know in the games industry are actually foreign owned. So our problem is that we over-deliver in content creation, but we're underserved by capital. And I'd like to see that redressed. For me, it would be have a Makers Meet the Money forum where we get the makers better understand the investment community, and the investment community better understands the games industry, because there's just not enough knowledge known by either. So to partly address that, I started a VC fund a couple of years ago with two people, Luke Alvarez and Cherry Freeman. We've raised $150 million VC fund. We've made 20 investments thus far, and we're going to start, the fund's closed, and we're about to start embarking on Hero 2. But there are so many opportunities. We have seen thousands of opportunities, and this market is absolutely underserved by capital. And it's not the initial startup capital that's the problem, and there's also the government's done well with SEIS and EIS and made it very tax advantageous to invest in the startups. And the later on capital is available, but there's that gap that's where we're serving, where people get to a certain stage and they don't know where to go next to ask for finance. So in summary, I would say the video games industry ticks all the right boxes for the new economy. Nobody was furloughed during the pandemic. Consumption is digital. The way you buy games is digital. The way they're created is digital. Everyone transferred to working remotely from home using cloud-based development platforms. You're able to access a global market through all the digital devices. There's been a boom in the industry. It speaks to Generation Z, who naturally interact with anything through their mobile devices, and guess what? They want their entertainment to be interactive too. And we're taking technology, are building the metaverse, the third space. You've heard Mark Zuckerberg talk about it. These are all led by gaming technologies. So it's digital, high tech, high skills, export focused. On day one, it's a 90% export to this global market. It's intellectual property creating, and it's regional. It doesn't rely on London for success. So I would say this industry is a great unknown success story. Please help it make a headline news for tomorrow's games makers and invest today. Thank you very much.